For 6 years, from 1960 to 1966, Carlos Castaneda served as an apprentice to a Yaqui Indian brujo, or sorcerer, named Don Juan. During those years, Mr. Castaneda was a graduate student in anthropology at the University of California at Los Angeles. His experiences with Don Juan led him into a strange world of shamanistic lore, psychedelic experience, and adventures in what Mr. Castaneda calls states of non-ordinary reality, some of which were frightening in the extreme, and all of which are fascinating in the extreme. His experiences with Don Juan are recounted in a book which has been published this year by the University of California Press, called The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge.
I met Don Juan in a rather fortuitous manner. I was doing at the time, in 1960, I was collecting ethnographic data on the use of medicinal plants among the Arizona Indians. And a friend of mine knew about Don Juan. He knew that Don Juan was a very learned man in the use of plants. And one day, we happened to see him at a bus station. My friend went and talked to him, and then he introduced me to Don Juan.
Carlos was brilliant. He could have been a legitimate scholar. Legitimacy bored him. He liked playing tricks, and he used his brilliance to play tricks. And his tricks made him rich and famous and got him on the cover of Time magazine, which didn't happen to most of the people in the university.
He was really in control of this whole phenomenon. He was this grandiose narcissist who felt he wouldn't be loved otherwise, and like some spiritual people say about Hitler, he did it for love. It's certainly got to be at least true of Castaneda.
Don Juan didn't say anything at all. He kept on staring at me, and that made me very uncomfortable. He seemed to have seen through me.
I really believed he became so close with his own teachings that he wanted to burn from within and go join Don Juan, even if that was a fictitious person that he made up.
The more time I spent with him and talked with him, I came to understand that the books were fiction. He even told me, forget about the books, don't even read the books, get rid of the books. That's not what it's about.
Those books changed my life.
So my first wife said I would be dead if I wouldn't have found these books, because I was just a hopeless hedonist.
However, I think something really went wrong.
There are people out there that are saying they should be banned.
And it went wrong not because of Carlos, it went wrong because of us, the people who did what we did with what we've been told by Carlos.
They're actually putting warnings. They're going to bookstores and putting warnings in the books. Read this at your own risk.
It infused my life with magic, a mystery, purpose, and I picked up the trail.
These were not ordinary books. Whether you were straight or stoned, they did something to you. These books made the reader into an apprentice. And that just like Carlos was presented as being an apprentice to Don Juan, the reader is an apprentice to the writing of Castaneda.
As an anthropologist, reality of consensus is only a very small segment of the total range of what we could feel as real. If we could learn to code reality or stimuli the way a shaman does, perhaps we could elongate our range of what we call real to a different interpretation. But the only way we have to code it is as hallucination, madness. We cannot conceive that one could do it.
He was just impossibly vital. Every day was a new, strange command, an excitement, a new vista, a new adventure. I mean, he delivered up a 12-ring circus. He was the Wizard of Oz.
Carlos Castaneda was a best-selling author for 30 years. He had written about a dozen books, gave one radio interview in the late 60s, and after that carefully manipulated his fame, limiting his publicity to infrequent newspaper and magazine articles. Carlos erased his personal history and remade himself anew, rarely allowing himself to be photographed. These pictures are amongst the last still known to exist. The inner circle of Carlos's life was no less enigmatic. There was Carlos, then there were the three women he called the witches: Florinda Donner Grau, Taisha Abelar, and Carol Teagues, all three of which he alleged also had an apprenticeship with Don Juan, the sorcerer Carlos wrote about in all of his books, and the man whom he allegedly based all his actions upon. Outside of those three women, Carlos formed a sorcerer's party of approximately 20 people. Outside of that, Carlos drew 40 people out of the first public workshop to create an extended sorcerer's party, and taught private classes to those 40 people. I was part of those private classes, and most of the people you'll see here are acquaintances from that private class and Carlos's sorcerer's party. Carlos Castaneda used to say, "We're all beings who are going to die." Now that statement seems self-evident, but for Carlos it was not just a metaphor. The intention behind that statement was for each of us to live each day, each second, as if it is our last moment on earth. This is your last moment, your last act. How do you want this moment to unfold?
Everyone I know who is truly a shamanic type walks close to death. I think that all of us tend to make better decisions and better choices when we are conscious of the presence of our own death as an advisor. What does this mean? It means we are capable of looking at all the issues of life from the standpoint of our death. And you know, that brings clarity. If you look at everything going on right now as if you're going to die today, you might make choices with greater courage and passion and compassion than you might do otherwise. You might just sort of lose it all and throw it away. But if, in addition to looking at all the issues of life as if you're going to die today, you have a firm, direct understanding that there is life beyond death, and that it has its own conditions, then I think you're going to do really much better than you might do otherwise. I notice a great difference as I go about the world between those of us who have a clear personal experience of life beyond death and those who do not. We tend to look at things a little bit differently. In our culture, a close-up personal encounter with death is not welcomed by most people. Death is really sort of blanked out. People don't want to think about it very much. Our culture doesn't give us a training for what follows death, the way that ancient cultures did. In ancient cultures, it's understood that one of the great things that you can do in life is to be ready to die because you've explored what goes on beyond death and you're ready in that sense. Dreaming prepares us for death. Dreaming shows us what might follow our own physical death. It puts us in contact with people who live on the other side of death. And from this comes power.
Academically speaking, I can point to the first drawing of a shaman from Siberia, which is where we get the word shaman from the Tungus people out in Siberia and Central Asia. And back in the late 17th century, 1690s maybe, a Dutch traveler, Nicholas Witsen, came back with testimony about these people and their spiritual healing practices under the heading of shaman. The West supplied the ism eventually. And he drew a picture of the shaman. And the shaman was shown with a drum, beating on a drum, and with an antler headdress. So there was a connection to the animal world. And underneath that was a caption, shaman, or priest of the devil. Our first picture of the shaman came with this demonic, satanic label. This was very threatening to the West. It was also threatening to our rationality, not just to our religion, because this was became soon the 18th century, the age of enlightenment in Europe, when we're supposed to get beyond all this mumbo-jumbo, you know? For the rationalists in the Enlightenment, there wasn't even going to be Christianity, let alone shamanism, but not many people were serious scholars of shamanism because it wasn't out in the culture. We'd heard about medicine men, we'd heard about Black Elk maybe, the Native American figure, but there just wasn't much about indigenous shamanism or this way of spiritual healing until Castaneda brought it into the wider public.
His MO, I think, was primarily to entertain, to be the center of attention. I believe that he was compelled to do a lot of what he did because he was a narcissist who is the kind of person who turns into a charismatic leader, especially if they have a great deal of intelligence. They sort of develop this uncanny, almost supernatural ability to read people, to figure out what people want in order to get the attention that they crave. And I think he was fortunate to have picked a subject to write about toward the end of the 60s after Timothy Leary and other of the hallucinogenic pioneers had already sort of created a lot of media attention and a lot of interest in hallucinogens. He seemed to be coming out with a real ethnographic account of drug use and visiting other worlds that, you know, hit the scene at just the right time, and he had the credibility of a degree from UCLA and a foreword by the head of the UCLA anthropology department, giving him a great deal of credibility, and that's, you know, I think that's what he owes his initial fame to.
I have spent a lot of time in my life reviewing scientific reports and looking for things that are wrong with them, and which most people who read scientific literature do. I mean, it's not something that's peculiar to me. And I applied this to Castaneda's books. There are three kinds of evidence in the books. One is the internal inconsistency of Don Juan's character, and there are many other internal inconsistencies. A second kind of evidence is the inconsistency between Castaneda's desert and the desert that has been observed by people who actually went to the desert. Don Juan and Carlos run around all over this desert at all hours of the day and night. They never get bitten by a mosquito. They never become overheated. They have all kinds of adventures that would be very difficult in the real desert. There are no details about the desert that seem factual, which suggests that he wasn't there. And the third kind of evidence is I put together 200 examples of echoes from the literature written by other people about all the things that Castaneda is writing about. And the language of other people comes out of Don Juan's mouth. And the dates when Castaneda wrote these things come shortly after the dates when they were published in the literature, or when the new edition became available in the library or the bookstore. It adds up to a pattern of constant reading and transformation of literature into story, which was his working method.
Okay, I'm going to right now go for something critical. I mean, I think it's critical because people ask me all the time. And I don't know if it's something you wanted to ask me, but people seem to think that Carlos was sort of a P.T. Barnum type, a real con. And I think that Carlos really was a seeker who believed in what he was doing. And if you weren't there for that call, that was an omen that you weren't energetically available. Carlos, whether he was crazy or not, I don't know, but he believed this. I don't think he was in it for a buck at all. People say he was in it for women. That's a very complex subject. Perhaps he was in it for kind of love and attention. I'm prepared to say that. But he was not cynical in the sense that he's being portrayed.
If you just think about the fact that millions of human beings on this earth felt such attraction for that book, just for that reason, we can deny he was a genius in terms of writing books. Which means that for a reason that we cannot understand, when he was writing, in the middle of the human mundane goals, the force of the Spirit was following through. And that was from the Spirit to the people through this writer. That should be a really, really strong impact on his life as a human being, receive the weight of the energy, the impact of the energy of so many people admiring him and calling him Nawal. Probably that was the most dangerous step he undertook, saying, I am the Nawal, I am the one, and the rest is bullshit. I get he really make a really, really dangerous movement in that moment, because then millions of people look at him and focus their attention and their energy on him, seeing him as the one, in some way as a guru. That should be an incredible pressure. We have heard about people who get crazy just because they get rich and they don't know how to handle the power of money. But this was not only about money, it was much more about that. It was about a dream. He created this dream, and I think he got trapped in the myth. By doing so, he made a big contribution for humanity, but at the same time, I think he paid a really big price. I think he was devoured by his own myth.
Nawal has two meanings basically within the Castaneda work. Nawal is the non-ordinary world, the unknown, which is quite a different use from the way that native peoples in Mexico and other parts of South America use the term Nawal. In those traditions, in the indigenous traditions of shamanism, Nawal is basically the spirit animal that is born, comes into the world somehow at the same time an individual is born, and that one's life is connected to, and that you can visit and use in your dreaming. Castaneda didn't use it that way at all. He said that Don Juan said that it means the unknown and the unknowable and non-ordinary reality, and so Castaneda used it in those senses. And they also use the term Nawal as being the title of a so-called double being, a man or woman who has twice as much energy, because they have, instead of the usual 2 balls of energy within their luminous egg, they actually have 4, supposedly. And that gives them the additional energy they need to be an intermediary to the unknown and non-ordinary reality for other people. And they become then, if they are found by someone who's part of Don Juan's supposed lineage, they become a Nawal man or a Nawal woman. And that's what Castaneda claimed that he himself was, that he was the Nawal, the person with double energy that Don Juan found, that Spirit pointed out to Don Juan as being the one to take over from Don Juan, to continue his lineage, which had supposedly spanned 27 or 28 generations.
Florinda used to say about Don Juan or about Carlos, and I don't actually believe there was a Don Juan, for the record, but she used to say that when the Nawal was with you, he was totally focused on you. His mind was not elsewhere. And when he left you, he was not thinking about you. And this was the transcendence of humanness, where we think about the past, we fantasize about the future, but we're not present. And I don't know I have no idea what went on in Carlos's mind when I wasn't there, but I do know that when he was with me, when I was alone with him, it was an experience of pure intensity.
For me, this is a very, very important differentiation, a very fundamental differentiation, the one between the person, Carlos Castaneda, and what I understand, the entity which I understand as the Nawal. It's like a radio station. It's something abstract, something broadcasting, something that has been broadcasting all along and I've been receiving. That is the Nawal. And the most personal or most concrete it's ever gotten, this concept of Nawal, was it sometimes in workshops. I remember certain workshops like at the Bay Area and once at Anaheim, when there was just a magnificent energy of 1,000-odd people, and the Nawal had a magnificent speech. Something happened, like in Anaheim when he dismissed all the Chakmols because of egomania. And he was so infused with energy. He was basically floating, speaking of perceiving energy. I mean, I was silent because I was just, for 2 hours, just focusing on his speech and shutting off my internal dialogues. I was capable of perceiving more. And there was this person coming off the stage, radiant, like I don't know what. I'd never seen anything like it. Totally radiant, like somehow floating slightly above the ground, coming towards me just by chance and hugging me for no obvious reason. And I felt not anyway particular. It was just a moment suspended in time. That was in the wild too, and that was the most concrete or most personal I ever got. And I loved this being beyond anything I ever. It was just like, wow. But then it dissipated and life takes over, and then, I don't know, at other times I find that sort of same entity babbling inanities in his own house where I was invited to a party and I found him disgusting. But that at best was Carlos Castaneda, or I wasn't able of perceiving something else.
That's what I wanted to believe. And do I think it? I don't know. That's where my uncertainty comes in. I really don't know. Who was he? You know? He was delightful as a speaker. He was more than delightful in the books, you know. He came across in the books sometimes as being very slow to get things, you know, but I always assumed that was to help us to be able to get it, you know. And the very first book, Journey to Ixtlan, when Don Juan says to him, "Are we equals?" You know, I closed the book and I said to Don Juan, I said, "Oh no, Don Juan, you're so much wiser than I am." And then I opened the book and Carlos is condescendingly saying, "Well, yes, we're equals," thinking all the while, well, I'm a scholar and you're only a lowly Indian who's never gone to school, you know. And I couldn't believe, "Carlos, what are you saying?" And then Don Juan says, "No, we are not equals. I am a hunter and a warrior, and you are a pimp." Whoa! It really got to the core of everything, you know.
I doubt, without having the full evidence, because I don't know that anyone does, I doubt that there is a real, literal, physical Don Juan Matus. However, I don't think he's fictitious in the sense of unreal, because there is a power in his character that has taken on a reality that I call fictive reality, or imaginal reality, that's not literal, not physical, but fully real, has effects in the world. People live by this reality. They guide their behavior through their encounter with this fictive being, Don Juan. If this is fiction instead of fact, it did create a reality. It can be a spiritual path. It does suggest one learning that we could take out of this, which is to me extremely important, namely the power and reality of imagination. I mean, what is it that created the writings, if they are not factual, and what is it that created the reality in the minds of all us readers, if not the power of imagination? That to me becomes a kind of Western shamanic resource that any of us who are not from Sonora or not from Cajamarca, Peru, or wherever, can nevertheless have access to. And so I find Don Juan and Carlos in the books and outside the books as creating something that testifies to the power of imagination as a process, and it gives us a product of that process, namely the stories of shamanism, which have awakened us to this resource of the spiritual legacy of the planet.
The Aborigines say that the big stories in life are stalking the right people to tell them. like predators in the bush. The big stories of life are hunting the people who will tell them. The big story of our lives, our personal lives, are hunting us. They hunt us in dreams. The bearers of the knowledge that belongs to us on the level of soul and spirit, that belonged to us before we came here, are hunting us. They will hunt us in dreams where our left brain inhibitions and everyday preoccupations are released. To do what? To put us in touch with what our larger identity intends for us. The events and circumstances of our everyday lives have their source and their meaning in a deeper order of reality. Traditional peoples, some traditional shamans, for example, say that nothing happens in ordinary life until it is dreamed. They're saying we not only see the future in dreams, but we create or co-create the world in dreaming for ourselves and maybe for the planet as a whole. I believe this is true, and I think if we're out of touch with that process of creation, we are limiting our world and limiting our experience of the world in radically awful ways. I say radically awful ways because if we're not in touch with that deeper experience of meaning, we will do things to ourselves, to our environment, and to each other, which we cannot do if we are in touch with the deeper nature and purpose of life. We cannot go on destroying our environment if we are in touch with this deeper level of reality. If we know that the world dreams and share in the dream of the world, if we know that the trees dream and share in the dream of the trees, if we know that the animals dream and share in the dreams of the animals, as all shamans know, for example, as we can know in everyday lives, and we cannot do to our environment what we've been doing. If we know that in dreams we can share the experience of other human beings, know what it feels to live their lives, know what it's like to walk in their shoes, then we cannot hurt them and harm them, or even be indifferent to them the way we might be otherwise. If we know that dreaming is a deeper dimension of reality, a real world may be more of a real world than ordinary life, rather than a fantasy world, then we can bring magic from that world into this one, and we can re-enchant our lives.
When classes first began, everyone was giddy over being chosen to join Castaneda's secret militia, battling the war to win abstract perception. But Castaneda's inner circle was like an onion. There were many layers to penetrate before you got to his center. And like everyone, I was eager to get drawn deeper inside. So I forced myself to the front of the room to get him to notice me. It worked, and he seemed to take a liking to me. But the more time that passed, the wider the divide grew between living the path alone and living it under the mandate of its leader. Castaneda had a knack for reading people, and I didn't want him to sense my hesitation. So one day, I inched my way to the back of the room, where I hoped to evade his powers of perception. The next day I received a phone call from one of his wards asking why I wasn't in class. Fibbing, I said I wanted to test my ego and give someone else a chance at the front row and describe the day's events to prove my attendance. Content, the ward hung up and I heaved a sigh of relief. I was off the hook. Minutes later, the phone rang again. Castaneda's ward called back with explicit instructions that Castaneda would prefer it if I stayed at the front of the room. I was back on the hook and chuckled to myself with a warrior's detachment. Castaneda had taught me well. A wave of energy he called the cloak of confidence overcame me. I knew what had to be done. I had placed myself in his sights, and now would have to implement his own teachings against him in order to continue receiving the value of his knowledge. There must have been others like me, but I dare not blow my cover to find them. Months later, my hesitation softened when Castaneda pulled me aside and commented at how impressed he was with my progress. My ego reveled in the compliment, but was it truth or mere manipulation designed to draw me out? I assessed the situation using Castaneda's own guidelines and concluded that even though it was clear he struggled to embody his own mythology, the myth had a power all its own. So I watched, unsure who had made the miscalculation. Me for embracing the path, yet secretly rejecting its leader, or those classmates who gave themselves over, body and soul.
I was in love. I was in love with Carlos. We met via Florinda and began, after 6 months, a love affair. And he told me that he had been celibate for 20 years waiting for me. And I laughed in his face. I said, come on, please. And he was
so charismatic that after several quarrels about it, he had me convinced that this was indeed true. This seems absurd, but I didn't live in Los Angeles. I didn't see him interact with any other women. I lived in the San Francisco area, and he called me every day, making love, and I would meet him for trysts in motels and hotels, and I didn't know. And eventually, when I moved to Los Angeles, it became absolutely apparent that I was part of a large harem, and was presented. This is 4 years into our sexual and romantic relationship, during which time he had proposed marriage to me, and I had responded that I would marry him, and was waiting for this wild trip to Las Vegas we were going to take to have a crazy elopement. And he'd asked me to announce publicly to all my friends in the Bay Area that I was his fiancée. So I told, it spread like among the New Agers like wildfire, and then he asked me to stop at a certain point when I told a great many people, and I said, why? And he said, I wanted to see what the auras of those New Agers would look like. And I said, well, what did they look like? And he said, well, they were jealous and envious and full of hatred when they found out. So now it's time to stop talking about it publicly. Well, by then, to this day, I have people saying, aren't you Castaneda's fiancé? And when he died, a woman who didn't know me well sent me a condolence card, a bereavement, sorry for the death of your husband card. And Carol was at my house, and she looked at it and she said, oh my God, can you imagine how many women got these? And she tossed it. So it is the blackest of humor.
When I found out about that, my first reaction was, why didn't he want to have sex with me? I got very jealous. But this is amazing. What's wrong with me, Because at that time I was still thinking the Noir was my only possible savior on earth. And so I went into this, what's wrong with me, like the very classic jealous scene, which I also thought I had far overcome, but it served a certain purpose, which is to inject the Noir into the women, and that it only applied to very slow women. That made me feel bad because I thought, oh, maybe I wasn't very slow, so that's why I didn't. So I still, as it turns out, I had sexual hang-ups because I just didn't get over it.
So I think he slept with so many people because he believed that this was the quickest way to hook them and impart them with his knowledge. He believed that his sperm changed our brains. That it actually, he intended to go to our brains. When making love, I was to intend that it reach my brain and alter it and free me from the shackles of my ego. And I think he believed that this was the case. I also believe he was greedy and he had issues with intimacy. One of the most profound conversations I had after his death was with one of the witches, Carol, who shared with me that she thought he had terrible intimacy problems which he carried with him to his grave, that he had never conquered them. And to hear it from her lips was very meaningful for me and very helpful. I'm very grateful to her for sharing that with me. And she said she thought he had more women than anyone on the planet. I said, Will Chamberlain? And she said, yes. She said, you cannot believe it. And so she said, and so he was greedy, he was hungry, he was insecure, all those things that intimacy problems entail. So it's a combination of just human folly and his belief that he was imparting something and receiving energy. I'm sure you're familiar with these Taoist beliefs that older people receive juice, so to speak, from younger people energetically. He also indicated that he believed in that it was a trade. We were getting the Noir's sperm and he was getting our life force.
The way he described it to me was that I was the person they'd been waiting for to complete their circle, and that the timing and everything was very perfect, and that they had been desperate, thinking that they weren't going to find the electric warrior, and then I showed up and they knew it was me, and that I was some key element in their energy configuration that they had to do whatever work that they were doing, which I didn't really know what that was. I don't think they ever found out. It's hard to say, really.
After being involved with a cult, which I believe this to have been a version of.
The word cult is a perfectly respectable word in the study of religions before it took on this connotation, though. A cult is just a group of people who worship together.
You know, not as horrible as some, and not as horrible as many, but a sophisticated cult.
The early Christian church was a cult in the Roman Empire.
I think he did brainwash these women. I think they wanted to believe that he was this mystical human being. He wove them into his myth.
It depends on if it's somebody else's spiritual path and a group of people are in there and some strange things happen, all of a sudden it's a cult, and I think that word's thrown around very loosely.
I think he had shown them some kind of magic, which he was capable of. He had read their minds.
There are cult awareness networks out there to protect us from cults, but then there are valid spiritual experimentations that are getting a bad rap.
He wrote many of them into the books. And I think after years of living with him, working with him, he created this wonderful, amoral life that some of them chose to continue in. Some women fell out.
I heard of quite a number of women who were kicked out after having had some sexual encounters with him and had breakdowns or went into suicidal states. I became suicidal at one point, very seriously, and I had suicidal thoughts previously in my life, so it's not like I had never flirted with deep depression before, but this was by far the deepest I'd sunk, and he wouldn't speak to me at this time, and some of the witches spoke to me, and they said, "We don't care if you kill yourself because you're just trying to do it to get our attention." And I said, "Is there any way to die as a warrior?" I said, "I don't want to live. I have nothing to live for. I mean, you won't have me, he won't have me. I see no purpose to life." Florinda calls the world the sea of gargoyles. There's nothing in this world to love. And Carol said to me, "Well, if you really could die as a warrior, free of wish for people's attention, I think that would be a very noble choice. But I don't think you're there, and you just want us to pay attention to you, and we won't even know." Florinda said, "We won't even notice if you're dead. So don't waste your time."
I never heard him promise me anything. Not one thing. And he told us over and over again that there wasn't anything that he was going to give us that we should expect. We came there of our own volition. And if anybody expected something more out of it, they were hearing something completely different than I heard.
Incessantly he told us that he is an asshole, that he isn't worth shit. Incessantly he told us we didn't want to believe it because we thought we wanted a guru, a holy man, and they had to have certain characteristics. But I think he had none of these characteristics. Probably on average he was a less I don't know what I should call it, but a less pleasant or whatever person than average. But he had an impeccable intent, and then he was just whatever he was. And this impeccable intent, this incessant fighting spirit, coupled with his South American mischievousness and ruthlessness or whatever, and forever feeding into this impeccable intent, that allowed us to pick it up and to turn it into something useful for us. And that is the know-how. This opening he created with his impeccable intent, not more and not less. And that's why it is controversial, because it is very much up to us what we do with this opening. And it is also controversial because we always focus on what the person did. But you see, there is another problem with this. Because any guru that goes out in glory is not a good guru, because he leaves only believers. And believers are not people who act, is not people who claim the knowledge. So a guru has to go out in a way in disgrace, if you want so. I mean, this is not new. Any Zen teacher, it is a known practice that a good Zen teacher has to dismiss his student at some time. But you see, you cannot dismiss somebody by saying, "Okay, now you learned enough, don't focus on me, you're on your own." It doesn't work like that. The student will forever be on his knees and thank his guru, unless he finds out that his guru was a piece of shit. But unless this is very, very convincing, he will not believe it ever. So there has to be facts and data. So this is tricky, and I'm not saying by any way that the Noir or Carlos Castaneda did this all on purpose. I don't think he did anything on purpose. He just had an impeccable intent. And the intent at large, whatever this may be, it organized it in a way which in the end it has this liberating effect.
I don't know, it's the spirit there. Forget the person. If you don't believe that the spirit's there, then it couldn't be there in any way for you. Either you believe that the spirit brought you there, the spirit controlled it. Carlos was a manifestation of the spirit, clearly. Why would we want to fight that issue? Then why, and what were we doing there? Because we wanted to hero worship a man? No. We wanted to get close to the spirit.
For me, coming from the Toltec tradition, seeing the brilliant parts of the works of Castaneda and seeing the crappy parts of some of his doings, it's just what we are. You know, in the Toltec tradition, there is this important symbol, which is the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl. The feathered serpent is different than the symbol of the Aztecs, where the eagle is killing the serpent, as you can see in the Mexican flag shield. But in Quetzalcoatl, the eagle is not killing the serpent. The serpent is what it crawls, is the mundane, the matter. The eagle is the spirit, what it flies. But the eagle does not kill the serpent. They become one. And I think that's a really balanced approach to what we are. Sometimes we're angels, sometimes we're devils. And we better do something about assuming that we are both, so we can do something about both sides, like making the good side, so to speak, grow and controlling and not letting the dark side to grow too much, so we can get to a balance. And then if we think about the figure of Castaneda in that fashion, perhaps we can see also the eagle and the snake. And I think this could be a good way to understand that. It's our responsibility to decide how we're going to approach that work. And I think that's relevant. Being able to rescue the valuable part and to take aside the part that is not useful for you. That's like more balance, and that's what I would recommend to most of the people to do with the books of Castaneda.
Allow your thoughts to dissolve.
Perception is based on what I think I see.
Relax your mind.
And what I think I know.
Release the tension.
Allow your mind to slip away.
Let go of fear.
There exists no phenomenon other than what arises from the mind. There exists no phenomenon other than what arises from the mind. There exists no phenomenon other than what arises from the mind.
Silence your internal dialogue.
Allowing forth the freedom experience to engage.
Release your mental chatter.
You are more than your physical body.
Allow your ego
move into
relax.
Pure presence.
You are more
see
than
vision of naked awareness.
Move into pure awareness.
Infinity is waiting. Perception is yours.
Feel the intensity of a silent mind.
You are gaining access to the infinite.
Feel the intensity of presence.
Your consciousness has awakened. You are experiencing the reality of what is. Move into the present. There is no past. There is no future. There is only now.
There exists no phenomenon other than what arises from the mind. There exists no phenomenon other than what arises from the mind. There exists no phenomenon other than what arises from the mind.
I went to this little dinner, and at that party he did give us some sorcerer's food, which was really interesting. And he had been preparing me for weeks on the phone, telling me he was making it, and that he was, one of the things he was making, he dug up a plant in Florinda's backyard and made it out of the plant that grows right in her backyard. And it was mildly psychoactive substances. One I identified as Datura, made exactly as he gives the recipe in his book, The Yaqui Way of Knowledge. It was that jelly, and it was good. He's a good cook. And I don't know how much longer, about half an hour later, we were watching skits. And all of a sudden I just felt a little tingle, and I looked to my left, and Bruce Wagner was sitting there. We both looked at each other at the same time and had this little sparkle in our eyes. And I knew that I was coming on to something. I thought, this is exciting, because he had told me over and over, you're going to fly, we're all going to fly. And I was just hoping that I didn't get dosed with something that would make me go nuts.
Did I really fly, Don Juan? That is what you told me, didn't you? I know, Don Juan. I mean, did my body fly? Did I take off like a bird? You always ask me questions I cannot answer. You flew. That is what the second portion of the devil's weed is for. As you take more of it, you will learn how to fly perfectly. It's not a simple matter. A man flies with the help of the second portion of the devil's weed. That is all I can tell you. What you want to know makes no sense. Birds fly like birds, and a man who has taken the devil's weed flies as such. El enyerbado vuela así. As birds do? Así como los pájaros? No. He flies as a man who has taken the weed. No. Así como los enyerbados. Let's put it another way, Don Juan. What I meant to say is that if I had tied myself to a rock with a heavy chain, I would have flown just the same because my body had nothing to do with my flying? Don Juan looked at me incredulously. If you tie yourself to a rock, he said, I'm afraid you will have to fly holding the rock with its heavy chain.
I think Castaneda must have had a great deal of personal discipline to carry on his presentation flawlessly year after year. But the end to which he was putting this isn't entirely clear. It is always difficult to know how much the charlatan believes his own story.
I mean, I have no doubts that he was a magician or a sorcerer, as the word is properly used in our tribe. Like, I remember the pigeon Taisha was supposed to have in her house, which was this big pigeon with no legs, kind of twisting, wobbling on sandy ground, which had come from another world. I was dying to see this pigeon. I did not want anything else in life at that time but seeing this pigeon. So I was sitting in the workshop just like almost sweating because I had heard the rumor that was, I believe, the Westwood workshop, that the pigeon is going to be shown. And I was out of myself because for the first time in my life, I knew now I'm going to see something which I can use to convince myself all those other things I detected, which are much minor than a, extraterrestrial animal, also have validity. So I wanted proof for my own experiences by seeing that extraterrestrial animal, that pigeon. And for some reason, he got around so well. I know the reason I was told why the pigeon didn't show up on stage is because some of us, our energies build up enough, and we would simply faint and lose it, and we would end up in mental hospitals, which is very convincing. I couldn't have agreed more. Of course, not me. I was ready to see that pigeon. So it didn't occur to me at that time to ask myself, maybe that was no pigeon, because I had heard that somebody had seen the pigeon in the parking lot in the car, and so I was sure there was this pigeon because there were so many people involved, so many eyewitnesses, which actually all were coming from Clear Green, and rumors handed over under the table that that pigeon was supposed to be there. So now, honestly, I decided for myself that there wasn't that pigeon in that car in the parking lot, and that maybe I'm just going to have to start giving validity to my own very minor little extraterrestrial detections without ever having seen that pigeon. So that's basically what I try to do with everything right now. I'm just going to do it without the pigeon. So. But anyhow, that would have been fabulous.
I know sometimes I tried to focus in and listened to every nuance of what he was saying. And then sometimes I realized his lips were moving, and it was irrelevant what he was saying, because something else was happening, but I could never quite put my finger on it.
These kinds of paranormal abilities and possibilities are part of the lure of Castaneda. I don't know whether they're possible. I'm an agnostic there. I don't rule it out. You know, every Navajo blanket has one thread that isn't tied. You know, leave a little bit open for surprise.
A dumb, stupid form of science, not the real leading-edge science, which is the province of visionaries, but a dumb form of scientism, an ideology of science that says that reality is just this or that, something you can measure and prove. A dumb form of science taught us to distrust inner experience, to distrust visionary experience, because it's awfully difficult to quantify and prove in laboratories. But that's not real science. The real science of the 21st century and beyond, the true science of the 21st century and beyond, is going to be a science that has dreaming at its heart. Because dream explorers are among the great scientists of our times. We can go directly into non-ordinary reality, and we can prove experientially what the speculators of quantum physics, the speculators about parallel universes are talking about. We can go there. We can know firsthand something about the possible reality of parallel universes, or how the dance of consciousness of the heart of the atom produces our material world. So the new science is going to be a science that has dreaming at its heart. As all great scientists have had visions and dreaming, Einstein's theories came directly from his dreams. Our scientists of the new era will be dreamers.
The debate over the authenticity of Castaneda's teachings rages more intensely today than when the movement was at its peak. For an outsider, the polemic can be reduced to one simple question: why? For Carlos, this was a revolution of consciousness, and the goal was ultimate liberation from dogmatic ideology, imprisoning us both in life and in death. The training ground for this ultimate freedom began with the militant pursuit of techniques Carlos alleged would refocus personal energy and enable conscious immortality. The recapitulation was a technique used to review and release every personal interaction since birth. Inner silence was the stillness of mind which made abstract perception possible. The warrior's way was our own code of ethics outside of acceptable social norms, and physical movement known as tensegrity redistributed personal energy in preparation for death's final leap called burning with the fire from within. Combined, these techniques reclaimed feral energy vital to the survival of humanity, yet lost in a world lulled by domestication. Whether any of this was true or not, Castaneda's intense belief in these concepts made life in his world all the more alluring. But he warned it was a world our ego would fight to the death to disallow. Castaneda compared the ego to a hunted monkey. In the jungle, hunters catch monkeys with a simple trap, a jar filled with nuts. The opening of the jar is just narrow enough for the monkey to reach in and grab the nuts. But when it tries to pull out its fistful of nuts, its hand gets stuck in the narrow mouth of the jar. If it dropped the nuts, the monkey could run free. But it doesn't. It clings to the nuts, clutching tightly, even when the hunters come and easily capture it. That's our ego. It would prefer to cling to that which is known, rather than let go and set itself free. Why follow Carlos?
As I understand the recapitulation, well, first of all, we were to make a list of all the people that we'd ever met in our entire lives. And that's daunting. He said start from the present and go back. For me, it was so much easier to start from when I was a little girl and then walk out into my neighborhood and find the places I went to and the people I saw. Was so much easier that way for me. But anyway, even that in itself, the idea of closing my eyes and seeing my house and then moving out from my backyard, and who did I play with in the backyard when I was a little kid? I mean, that brought back all kinds of memories and feelings, But the whole idea is to pick a person that you're focusing on, create a scene, and then move into that scene. And to me, it was you breathe in everything from the scene that you can remember. You breathe it in, and then you breathe out all the stuff that's put on you that isn't you. You breathe yourself back in from the scene, and you let go, people's judgments, especially if it's mommy or daddy when they're coming down on you for something. You breathe out those judgments, let them go. Breathe back in the pieces of yourself that get scattered when those judgments come down on you. That's my understanding of the intent of recapitulation is pulling back the pieces of yourself and letting go the things that are put on you that aren't necessarily who you are. But to me also exploring those scenes and then again feeling like one day I was recapitulating the first love of my life. And the rush of feeling and emotion that came up, it was so still alive. And it had been over 20 years, And the tears were as real today, They were coming down, they were real. And the feeling was as real today as it was back then. So that to me is a gift. It's a time, a giving yourself time to find out who you are.
Inner silence is the hardest thing to attain, and that is my struggle every single day, every single second, and probably I'm obsessed right now with inner silence, but that is the key for me. That is the key of everything. When you have the control of what is here and be able to say, shut up. And when that thing shuts up, then you can talk about business,
For years I have truly tried to live in accordance with your teachings, I said. Obviously I have not done well. How can I do better now? You think and talk too much. You must stop talking to yourself. What do you mean? You talk to yourself too much. You're not unique at that. Every one of us does that. We carry on an internal talk. In fact, we maintain our world with our internal talk. How do we do that? We renew it. We kindle it with life. We uphold it with our internal talk. Not only that, but we also choose our paths as we talk to ourselves. Thus we repeat the same choices over and over until the day we die, because we keep on repeating the same internal talk over and over until the day we die. The warrior is aware of this and strives to stop his talking.
It's like life, and what is my position in front of life? What is my little voice telling me? It's telling me, hey, you cannot do this, you are crazy, forget it. That is what it's telling me all the time. But now I'm able to, hey, what are you saying? I'm doing this, but this is saying something else. So there are like two different descriptions of the same, this is me, right? But this is my dialogue here, and this is what my body is doing. And how can I integrate what my little crazy voice is telling me with my body? Probably if I integrate these two poles, probably I can intend things, because my body is going to be working harmoniously with my mind. I'm going to be in control of my body and in control of my mind. It's going to be unity.
Tensegrity is a series of movements, all different kinds of movements that they also call magical passes, that in the mid-90s Castaneda claimed had been taught to generation after generation of people in his lineage of sorcerers. He claimed that they were movements that were practiced by sorcerers of ancient Mexico. They were passed down to his tradition, and that he and his co-workers had compiled, changed them in some ways to take out what he claimed were the darker, more morbid elements of them, so that they could be taught to a public audience. One does find in a number of his books movements of different kinds mentioned, but he never talked about tensegrity. It was a term that he coined based on architecture in the mid-90s. In my research, I found that Castaneda was doing private sessions with individuals dating back at least to the late 70s.
The fact is, the movements energize you. They do. And they trim you, too. I've said stories here about stopping, Things are not as trim as they were before. So it would be good for me to practice, at least some form of movement. And I've also heard other people who have practiced Kung Fu and a variety of other forms, yoga and whatnot, say that never did they get the kind of a kick from it that they got from tensegrity. So, and these are not necessarily what is now known as true believers, These are general people just saying, well, I don't know what it is, but there's something that I got with the tensegrity that I didn't get with these others. And a thought just crossed my mind, oh yes, there's been a lot of talk about placebo effect, amongst the list people. And placebo effect is that when you believe something strongly enough that it will affect the outcome. Well, maybe that is what it was that got us all. Maybe it was the belief that there was that extra added something and we were reaching for freedom. So maybe that was what projected forward so that we got more of a kick. I don't know. But my feeling right from the beginning was whether Carlos is telling us the truth or not, and there was something in the back of my mind that said that, whether he's telling us the truth or not about this coming from the ancient Toltec sorcerers, actually moving is what I need to do because I sit too much. And I figured at the very least, I'll get benefits from my physical self, and at the very best, I'll get what he's saying we'll get.
Of all Castaneda's followers, one stood apart from the rest as the living epitome of his teachings. Her public presentation of the warrior's persona was so intense that she became the icon to thousands of his followers. That woman was Kylie Lundahl.
I loved Kylie. I loved the passion that she had in watching her move. And I'm just getting goosebumps now thinking of her. Kylie believed not only in what Carlos was saying, but she wanted to attain that. And you could see it with every atom of her being, how she gave during these moves, and her focus, her attention. I think she truly loved him. You could see it. And sometimes when I'd pick you up, I would see her running to the car to get him, and you could see it. She really, I think there was something, it was a dual thing inside of her. She felt love on a personal level for this man, but at the same time, there was respect because this was the man that helped save her, helped turn her life around, that she's following, and she's becoming a sorcerer, and so there's a dual level inside her. You could see the respect, and everything she did with 110% of her being.
Especially in the United States, life is so easy. I am coming from South America, and survival is difficult there. I mean, you have to really struggle to make a living and to have a decent life. I think that people there, for that reason, people is closer to the being that is going to die. I've seen the dogs here, that is incredible, that fascinates me, because in my country you see the dogs, and the dogs are like so wild, and they bite you and they kill you in the streets, and they are like running all over the places, and I love those dogs. Are scary as hell, but are dogs. And here you see those huge dogs completely powerless, completely dead. Just expecting their food. Actually, they know the time of that the food is coming, and so boring and so useless, like a toy. They just look cute and that's it, but they don't have the aggressiveness, they don't have the power, they don't have the dog instincts. And the human beings, we are into the same boat.
If I listen to people, I don't meet too many, but sometimes you meet somebody with glazed eyes and talking about the love that is all in the universe, is only love, and they connect. I think there's something fishy about it. They seem incredibly misled.
How boring is that? Carlos used to crack me up with his imitation of heaven too. It was he used to make great joke about the pace of heaven, remembering how slow it was. It was lovely. So he had a better deal going. We'd be pirates in infinity rather than harp-playing idiots.
It was fun, it was intense, it was serious, it was meaningful. It wasn't frivolous.
Because it was so realistic, it was so pragmatic, it was not way out there, it was not some religion that had the scent of heaven and holiness. It was so down to earth. It communicated that what you need in this world was like these four qualities of a stalker, if you recall. You need ruthlessness, you need cunning, and you need patience and sweetness. Not just sweetness. And I recall with pleasure the Noir's imitation of the angels in heaven who just walk very slow in infinite sweetness. And however appealing this may seem for a second in our busy world, but to spend all eternity, like the Noir put it, just walking slow in sweetness, I think is not too appealing a picture. And we live in a predatory universe. We always forget this. A lot of sort of well-meaning world healers forget that looking for the ultimate love behind everything. We live in a predatory universe. I think it's very important, and I'm glad that the Noir put my attention on this fact again and again, because we do. There is absolutely nothing out of this predatoriness in this universe. And it has to be, because in order to evolve, we need antagonism. Evolution without antagonism, meaning without something always trying to eliminate us or fight us or stop us, forcing us to get stronger and better and smarter and evolve, there is no evolution. And evolution is the very movement of life. Evolution is life. So without antagonism, there is no life. And we forget that. This mood, it's an honest mood, it's pragmatic, it's right.
The purpose is to be what we are. The purpose is to being able to take our own destiny in our own hands. The purpose is to recover balance. It's about freedom. It's about power.
One of the main problems involved in getting in touch with our dreams is we have to relinquish our illusions of control. We are required to relinquish the illusion that we understand everything, that reality can be put inside any box of understanding, and we'll be like that. We have to relinquish our idea that we are masters of the known universe and accept that we are operating within a larger universe with which we are connected. We are in fact multidimensional experiences, multidimensional beings living in ordinary reality, a three-dimensional existence. Dreaming takes us to the heart and epicenter of our multidimensional identity. That is terrifying to those of us who live primarily on the level of the ego, on the level of the everyday personality, or on the level, worst of all, of what other people tell us we are or can be. It is terrifying to the ordinary self, to the daily trivial mind, to be in the presence of a larger reality that might seem to swamp its expectations and ability to control things. So, to go into dreaming, we need to find a way to reopen naturally and easily to the fact that there is a lot more to us than we understand on the level of the everyday mind. That's the beginning.
I say it is useless to waste your life on one path, especially if that path has no heart. But how do you know when a path has no heart, Don Juan? Before you embark on it, you ask the question, does this path have a heart? If the answer is no, you will know it, and then you must choose another path. But how will I know for sure whether a path has a heart or not? Anybody would know that. The trouble is nobody asked the question.
And I think the only question in my mind that I would ask Carlos was, let's say a person is a layman who has never been at a workshop, never read a book, not even sure if the warrior's path is the path for him. But yet this person is interested and believes in the teachings and can be so impeccable in his intent and thought and focus that he can maybe hook and latch a ride when it's time. The only question that I have. It all comes down to me.
Castaneda constantly reminded us that each moment could be our last, and promises of leaving this earth with him were repeatedly contradicted by assertions that this was a path we each traveled alone. But when our last days with Castaneda finally came upon us, few were prepared to sustain this ultimate blow. Classes were suspended the period before Castaneda's death, and during that time, we heard whispered reports that his energy was low. Months passed in limbo, and I quietly watched the few friends I'd secretly kept and wondered if the end of our time together was drawing near. Was I leaving with the Nawal, or was he leaving me? For me, that's when the split between the man and his teachings became ultimate and clear. Castaneda said that every decision on the warrior's path was valid, provided it was made with the knowledge that it could mean our death. Years of watching the polarization between Carlos and his teachings gave me the confidence to accept my fate. It was time to heed his words and embrace my solitary journey. I resolved that regardless of what happened, my time with Carlos had come to an end. I chose the path over its leader once and for all. It wasn't long before that decision was put to the test. I received a call from Felix, who said he and another classmate had learned some significant news. Felix paused, then said, "The Nawal is gone." He waited for my reaction, and it surprised us both when I told him the news meant nothing to me. Felix went on to explain that 2 of the witches and 3 of the highest-ranking women in Castaneda's group had also vanished. In one fell swoop, our sorcerer's world came crashing down, and I felt fortunate that my decision to break from Castaneda had come in time to deflect the blow. Felix took my reaction as an omen that it was time to tell the others. I agreed, although we both knew it would send shockwaves through our tiny enclave of sorcerers, and ultimately to an entire generation of readers as well.
Was on CNN. Writer Carlos Castaneda dies or something. This is quite a few weeks after he actually had died. I do miss him because he always surprised me. Perhaps he surprised me because he went to his death never admitting any of the supposed trickster, hoaxish things that were involved with his work.
Absolutely, and you wouldn't want him to, because it's like the Olympic Games. You want the perfect 10. You want the perfect performance. And Castaneda was, in my judgment, the perfect hoaxer because he never admitted anything.
I was glad, really, that he was gone, because I didn't feel like he was accomplishing anything good for himself or for anybody else.
Then I had to face a lot of reactions of my fellow practitioners, and they all were devastated, most of them, because they felt the Nawal left us and now something bad's going to happen, which in fact did, but at that time I didn't expect that. And so that confused me, and I kind of started also being suspicious about Why didn't we know? Did he really die? Did he leave? Because the official statement apparently was he left in the tradition of the sorcerers of his lineage. So I thought, well, then everything's fine, until I learned from all those people who did this incredible research that maybe he indeed really died of liver cancer. That caused some conflict in my thinking. I feel very far from being through with whatever that famous grieving process is. One of the problems was that when he died, we were all told very different stories about his death, in the in-group even. People think we all knew what went on. No, we do not. We all had there were different levels of intimacy with his final days, and we all knew different things. And there were some very elaborate tall tales told about the disappearance of the witches. I was very tortured because Carol, one of my reasons for wanting to break with her was that one day she would tell me the witches are dead, and the next day she would tell me they're alive, dead, alive, dead, alive, dead. And I needed to mourn or grieve if they were dead, and I could never get a straight answer. And one day she was laughing and saying, I'm the only one who knows. I have the power here. I'm the only one who knows the answer, and everyone needs me for this information. And that was a moment when I just thought, no, this relationship has to end. This is scary. She's loving the power of knowing whether these women are dead or alive. And I do need her for this. And I have to stop caring and needing her for this. I have to stop needing to know whether they're dead or alive.
The burial of the warrior was a technique used to balance personal power, where the earth's embrace absorbed energetic anomalies, then recharged the body with the power of its essence. The experience reclaimed energy dispersed by daily life and imbued the sobriety required on the solitary path of knowledge. Castaneda's own burial was in fact a cremation, perhaps an attempt by those closest to him to fulfill his requisite of burning with the fire from within. It's speculated that the women who disappeared reenacted a passage from one of Castaneda's books, tossing themselves and his remains into an abyss. According to the books, the purpose of the act would not be suicide, but a reunification with the Nawal. Did these women achieve their goal and reunite with Carlos, or were they emotionally dejected lovers, merely mourning the loss of their beloved? Whether blinded with the bias of a sorcerer's training or the bias of dogmatic social norms, the paradox remains the same. These women had a passion worth living for, and a passion worth dying for as well.
At any rate, those 5 women were Florinda Donnegrau, Taisha Abelar, and those two had written books about their supposed experiences with Don Juan. Kylie Lundahl, who was born Deanne Jo Alvers in Iowa. The other 2 were Talia Bay, whose real name is Amalia Marquez, who was the president of Clear Green, and the so-called Blue Scout, originally Patricia Parton, they called Nuri Alexander. She was the last one to join them. As best I can piece together, 4 of the women left together, probably in 2 separate cars, and headed east toward the desert. And Nuri seems to have joined them at the last minute, took her own car that was registered to her, whereas the other 2 were driving cars, whereas the other 4 were driving cars that had recently been purchased for cash and weren't traceable. She drove her own car and abandoned it in Death Valley. Police found it and reported it to Clear Green because they found some identification there and papers with Clear Green's number on it. And that's the last we know of them.
The excitement of their life, what could replace the excitement of decades with Carlos? Being cast back out into the world. I mean, if they're alive now, life must seem dull. It might seem dull. On the other hand, I will say this. Let me take a devil's advocate position for one moment. After he died one day, Carol and I were spending a lot of time together at that time, and I said, I have to say something to you, Carol. I'm relieved that this is all over. I'm so exhausted. And she said, we're all relieved. We're all exhausted. So their allegiance was absolute. There's an addiction to the adrenaline, an addiction to the love, and the tremendous adventure, and all the things we've talked about hoping to die with him. At the same time, we were all just afraid.
I know a lot of people had thoughts of suicide, including people within the group and people who'd been close to the group. It came up for me, so I consulted the I Ching about it, and the I Ching was like almost saying, yeah, do it. So that made me work with it some more, and basically I started developing this idea about maybe going out to the desert. I knew that the car had been abandoned in Death Valley, and I thought of going out there and seeing what I could see, and if I had a feeling that it made any sense to jump off somewhere. I didn't know what I was going to do, but that was sort of this thing in the back of my mind. But my air conditioning wasn't working, and somehow I could imagine a scenario where I might do something to myself out in the desert. This was getting close to summer, but I couldn't imagine driving hours in the car out to the desert with no air conditioning. So it took a couple weeks for it to get fixed, and during that time, basically, I sort of started to get a little more grounded.
So then the water was gone, the witches were gone, all my coziness, my home, my sorceric world blasted apart. And in this time, once I met with Corey Donovan, who is actually a good friend of mine, and he talked and talked and talked. He talked about all the things he had found out about authenticities and about lies and things that were not quite as we have been told they were. So he was talking and talking and talking. I just let him talk. And while he was talking, I sort of, I don't know, it came into my awareness, but at the same time, I also had present all my bodily experience with these people, with Florinda, with the Noel. So here he was talking facts, and here I had a very strong, 4 or 5 years of personal interaction. I had a bodily experience. And it was oscillating back and forth, and there was absolutely no way to reconcile it. I did not fight Corey. I believed whatever he said. I had no problem with it. But on the other hand, it did nothing, absolutely nothing to my physical and bodily memory or experience of the magnitude of this interaction with these people, with this myth. So, and what it did, it created a magnificent opening in form of a cognitive dissonance. Just right then and there, the moon shining into my face in my old apartment where Corey and I was living. It was maybe a 1.5 hour event or something. And here I was, the biggest cognitive dissonance and opening I had ever experienced. And Corey was instrumental. He held open one side of it, and the other was just my energy body or my memory or whatever. And I walked out of his place so silent and so content as I could not remember. And from then on, I don't know, then one thing followed another, and suddenly, I don't know, at one point, I suddenly saw a light. I mean, figuratively speaking. I don't want to sound too new agey. I saw a light. It was like, and it was my own light. It was my very own navigation, my own light tower, which up to some time before the Nawal has been. For 20 years I followed him. I followed his navigation. I followed his finger pointing the direction. And there he was, and finally sort of, I don't know, destroyed and yet not destroyed. And I finally had my light back. And it was not only enough of a navigation, things started happening again. Everything had been dead for a while, and things started happening again. Synchronicity started happening, my body started shivering again, my passion came back. My passion came back. And this was a passion without a goal orientation. And that was new. And that was all that was new. And I think it is still all that is new. I have a passion now which is not geared to anything in particular. And before I had a passion, a strong passion, but it had a very concrete focus I thought I wanted to, I don't know, I thought first maybe I wanted to be powerful. I wanted to be a sorcerer. I wanted to have many women around me. I wanted to burn from within. I didn't want to be so stupid like the average population and die. I didn't want to die. I mean, this was the ultimate egomania, actually. And that's what some people now hold against the noir. Well, how do you motivate anybody except by pulling on egomania? And then you drop out the floor like it so happened, and then now you're floating, and now you're grabbing, either you grab back for your egomania, that you've been right all along, and then you're going to be resentful, and you're going to hate the noir, or you patch up, or try to gain time and nothing happened, or you just fall. And I didn't do that on purpose. I don't know. I just was lucky because I'm Felix. And I just fell and I didn't mind falling. And then suddenly I saw some light. And now I have a passion. And I don't care to die. I don't even interested anymore in anything. I don't want to be powerful, beautiful. I'm very happy with the one woman who shares my life with me. I don't want anything. But I'm so full of passion. And if you come in, check out our cafe, you should see that. It is all in red and yellow, and it's so full of passion. And that's so beautiful. And that's why I'm here today, because I'm so grateful. Because, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm so grateful.
Don Juan stared at me for a brief moment and then moved his eyes away. When a man embarks on the paths of sorcery, he becomes aware in a gradual manner that ordinary life has been forever left behind, that the means of the ordinary world are no longer a buffer for him, and that he must adopt a new way of life if he is going to survive. Every bit of knowledge that becomes power has death as its central force. Death lends the ultimate touch, and whatever is touched by death indeed becomes power. Without the awareness of death, he would be only an ordinary man involved in ordinary acts. He would lack the necessary potency, the necessary concentration that transforms one's ordinary time on earth into magical power. Thus, to be a warrior, a man has to be keenly aware of his own death. But to be concerned with death would force any one of us to focus on the self, and that would be debilitating. So the next thing one needs to be a warrior is detachment. The idea of imminent death, instead of becoming an obsession, becomes an indifference. The sole idea of being detached from everything I know gives me the chills, I said. You must be joking. The thing which should give you the chills is not to have anything to look forward to, but a lifetime of doing that which you have always done.
Carlos used to call infinity the dark sea of awareness. It was the sea in which we would all navigate our own awareness into that vast unknown, for no other purpose than to explore its wondrous mystery. And though the chances of success were as futile as a fish that could fly, the struggle for that journey could not be denied by anyone touched with the yearning to break free. Carlos called it the solitary journey. He said that, although you will meet people in your life who are traveling along the same path or heading in the same general direction, ultimately you will face your death alone, venture out into the dark sea of awareness and solitude, and discover wherever it may take you. No promise of heaven, no promise of eternal life, only an endless struggle of the sublime en route to an adventure beyond that which is known. That's where Carlos was the true realist. He didn't try to sugarcoat the afterlife. He didn't try to sugarcoat our death. And I think those that were damaged most by Carlos are those that expected the most from him. If one engaged Carlos as a solitary being who was traveling down their own path and just happened for a time to find a man like Carlos traveling in the same general direction, then you would have expected little or nothing from him other than temporary companionship and a few shared moments of enjoyment, because ultimately how we shape our lives would rest on our own shoulders. So for me, I am left with fondness for Carlos. He was a true visionary. And when measured against the average citizen of this planet, he was by far a rare and inspired solitary bird.
Don Juan's very versed in what we stand for. I think if I don't make the effort to render his world as a coherent phenomena, he'll go by the way it has for hundreds of years as a nonsensical activity. When it is not nonsensical, it's not fraudulent, it's a very serious endeavor. It's enlarged my sense of how important today is. And it's only the terrible impact of Don Juan's teachings that I came to realize how important it is to be here now. And it renders the idea of entering into states, to what I call non-ordinary reality. Instead of disrupting the states of ordinary reality, they render them very meaningful. My effort to make sense of his world is it's my own way of, let's say, paying back to him for this grand opportunity.